Commentary on the Kena Upanishad, Sri Aurobindo is describing the 5 successive operations in its assumption of form. In other words, all being, vibration of conscious being, force of conscious being, the force goes through 5 successive operations in its movement. And the result of the 5 successive operations is the appearance of form, solid, persistent, divisive. And yet, the truth behind this appearance of the world in form is pure force, pure consciousness. When our senses see, when we touch, feel, smell, taste, etc., it is impossible to imagine that all of this is just one single force, one single ocean of consciousness, in constant flux of movement. But through these 5 layers of operations, we have this appearance. And so, Sri Aurobindo explains in the passage we will see in the Life Divine, this entire working of the 5 operations of force belongs to the domain of what we call nature, as distinct from consciousness, which observes nature. In the last portions we have read, simply for our revision, the first modification of force is intensity of vibration creating regular rhythm, which principle is called the ethereal, and it corresponds to the experience of sound that we have in the 5 senses. The second is contact or intermittence of movements of consciousness, which constitute this rhythm, which principle is called the aerial or atmospheric principle, which corresponds to the principle of the sense of touch. The third operation is definition of grouping of movements which are in contact, their shape, which is the igneous, which is called the igneous principle and corresponds to the perception of sight. The fourth is the constant welling up of the essential force to support in its continuity this movement which has been defined, which is called the liquid or water principle, corresponds to the experience of taste in the 5 senses. And fifth, the actual enforcement and compression of the force in its own movement, which maintains the form. And this is called the earth or solid principle. And in the 5 senses, it corresponds to the principle, has the basis of smell. Now this we have dwelt upon in some detail last time also, looking at it from various perspectives also of the principle of science, and then Sri Aurobindo's conversation with Pavitrada, which is recorded from memory. Here now we look at Sri Aurobindo's description in the Life Divine, which is directly in the words of the Master. This is in the chapter titled Conscious Force. In this chapter, he's describing how all phenomenal existence resolves itself into force, into movement of energy. And so, how exactly that force and movement of energy appears to us as this domain of fixed, steady form? This question is being dealt with. And then the next question after that becomes, what is the cause of this? And then later, why at all does it take this? But these are the overall scheme of the chapter. We look now at this first question. And he puts it thus: All phenomenal existence resolves itself into force, into a movement of energy that assumes more or less material, more or less gross or subtle forms for self-presentation to its own experience. That is, the energy takes on these forms to experience it. In the ancient images by which human thought attempted to make this origin and law of being intelligible and real to itself, this infinite existence of force was figured as a sea, initially at rest and therefore free from forms. But the first disturbance, Kshobha, remember? The first disturbance, the first initiation of movement necessitates the creation of forms and is the seed of a universe. If we just take this analogy of the ocean a little farther, if we see the ocean at rest, of course there's no form. The moment you have a movement of a stream of water in relation to the rest of the ocean, you have a force, distinct. And the movement can have oscillations, waves, against the rest of the ocean. The moment that stops, there is nothing at all. There is nothing against which you can have any relative movement. Where are you in the ocean? You cannot say, because everything is equally still. But the moment there is one movement, there is distinction. And now I can say I'm near the movement, I'm far from the movement, I'm in the path of the movement, I'm against the movement or with the movement. But when it stops, where am I? Nothing. There is no form, there is no reference, there is no phenomenal existence. But movement immediately creates this, and a simple movement of the water flowing. Consider now two movements of water flowing relative to each other. If they're moving parallelly relative to each other, there is no movement. There has to be something in opposition. Even if we say perpendicular, some opposition has to be there for us to experience relative movement. So let's take the most extreme, two movements. And immediately you have two different, as if, objects. Some sense of form, two streams. But notice that the interesting stuff is happening where the two meet. What is happening where they meet? Friction, contact. One is pressing on the other in some way. One is modifying another, force against force. And you see the modification of the second level contact taking place. There is pressure. In the Navy, it is a well-known phenomenon that when two ships travel parallelly, and the water in front is being cut up into two streams. As these two ships move, the stream in between is under pressure. Because the ship is wide, the water is as if compressed. It is forced to speed up to catch up with the water behind. And because of this speeding up, effectively there is as if a pressure from the water outside which is moving less fast, or farther out, which is not moving at all relative to itself, but moving relative to this boats. Result of that is a pressure from outside on the water, on the ship, bringing the ships closer. So if you have two ships moving parallelly, this begin to be pushed closer. By what? There's no attraction between them, there's no gravitation, there's no electromagnetic field. The water outside is pushing because of the movement. Movement creating force against other movement. Contact, pressure, and it brings the ships together. If they're not careful, they can even clash against each other. I had once occasion to be on the Indian Navy ships when they did a demonstration off the shore of Pondicherry. And there had two ships moving parallelly. They threw a rope across and somebody was sliding from one ship to the other. In the old days, before they had helicopters, this was the easy way to do at low cost, to move from one ship to another, to send mail from one to another without stopping while they're still moving. And as we watched, it's one of the rules of the Navy, whenever they do some operation like this, they have someone with a camera In case there's an accident, there's a record of what happened. So we saw the cameraman turning back, and we looked behind, we saw one of the ships had begun to be sucked inwards. The back of the ship was being pulled rapidly, and immediately the captain of one ship ordered the other to break away. And while there were two ropes tied, the ship just broke away rapidly. The ropes were torn with a loud snap, and they moved far enough that this phenomenon stopped. You see something very simple here. Movement of force against force, creating pressure, attraction, repulsion. When this continues long enough, let's say now two streams of water in the ocean moving against each other, this attraction repulsion starts, you will see visually, a rotation. A part of the water moves like this, gets sucked below, moves the other way, gets sucked above, moves the other way, and a rotation begins. A stable form. Interestingly, the third principle of modification takes place. Pure force against pure force, pressure causing eventually rotation and stable form. But the form itself, the form is stable, but internally the force is always in movement. If this force stops, or if that force stops, the rotation will cease, dissolve. You need something which sustains the force. In the ocean, sometimes you get these large whirlpools. And they happen when two streams of currents pass by each other, or they meet in some form. Their clash, their joining causes this rotation. But as the force of these streams fades, the rotation fades. In some places, though, you will find the rotation recurring. And that's when, under the ground, there is a hole through which the water can flow out. Often a rocky base with the hole, a cavern. And that creates a movement of the water moving down, and the rotation feeds itself, perpetuates, continues, even with no apparent force outside. In the recent tsunami that took place in Japan, there was a dramatic aerial footage. The tsunami is simply a force of the water moving into the land. But as a result of the forces partly bouncing off from the land, from particular shapes of the terrain, there was a combination which created a massive whirlpool in the water. And you could see boats being sucked in towards the center. And the thing sustained for many hours. So a sustaining principle becomes the fourth modification, where the thing continues. But notice, in the sustaining movement, we're still looking at a picture visually which is two-dimensional. In the three-dimensional ocean, it has to be more complex. It's not only rotating this way, it's also rotating the other way, a toroid movement. And as the toroid movement, a torus-shaped movement, continues, it as if feeds itself with a single force moving through. And that's the fifth stage of movement, where it acquires a solidity, a resistance. Now here we're just looking at the example of an ocean of water or an ocean of air. In the ocean of air, we can try this experiment. Simply blow. The result is a part of the air in front of the mouth flows, the rest of the air is not flowing. You have relative motion. As this moves, the other doesn't move, there is a frictional layer. The frictional layer has a circular form, and it starts a rotation in a circular form like this all around. You have a toroid shape. And the toroid shape of air circulates, catches airflow around it, molecular flow around it, and continues quite far without dissipation. So single movement like this, if it was represented with smoke, with air coming out which is smoky, you will see a toroid flow moving quite far, several meters, and then gradually dissipating because the sustaining force is no more there. If you have two toroid flows, one person does poo, another poo, the two move, they hit each other because each is sustaining and holding its shape. They bounce off. like balls, like particles. If two toroid flows come against each other, but they are both opposite in rotation, they will join, neutralize each other, and there will be nothing. But if they are not perfectly balanced, then if they're slightly off, they will bounce off like balls. In an emptiness where there is no toroid flow, you could push and knock, a spanda, a push, force, pushing, initiating. And two opposite rotating toroid flows could come out of nothing and move in opposite directions. Now, those of you who are familiar with the common concepts of physics as we read in textbooks will immediately recognize we are describing particles and their behavior. Two particles, as they come in close to each other, they bounce off like billiard balls. If they are antiparticles, an electron and the opposite of an electron, I forget the term. When the two come together, they join, neutralize each other, and they're gone. Particles vanished into pure energy. Where is the energy? Static. The energy moves, ripples out, and you have two particle and antiparticle moving out of nothing, and a particle appears. The two particles join together. If they are particle and antiparticle, there is a reversal of the whole thing, pure energy. Consider that force is energy in movement. When the force lapses, there is only energy, the ocean of energy. Chit Shakti, conscious energy. Force is the energy moving, force moving through these 5 degrees of modification, creating sustaining form, creates the appearance of particulate behavior. All particles, electrons and its opposite, positron it's called, all particles can be resolved into such particle and their neutral and their contrary, opposite, emerging out of nothingness and eventually lapsing into so-called nothingness. Our perception from the modern physics point of view is ignoring the ocean of energy and only focusing on the particle, which is a phenomenal appearance. The truth of it is force and the 5 gradations, 5 stages of modification of force to create appearance of persistent particles. So this is the image which he is telling us, the ancient images by which human thought attempted to make this intelligible. So through this image, it's obvious. The question now arises, all this is picturing we are taking of ocean of water or of air. What is the underlying ocean in which the whole physical reality appears? What is it made of? Because all these phenomena which we have just described, 5 degrees of modification, you can have in air, you can have in water, you can have in any fluid. What is that underlying fluid? That is the existence which is consciousness, which is energy. Sat, Chit, Chit Shakti, sustained and expressive of its delight. But that itself operates at a pure level and then at a modified level. So our physical world, according to the ancient science, has as its underlying basis the ethereal substance, consciousness substance, but a gross conscious substance. There is behind that a subtle ether, Chit Akasha, Chid Akasha, which is the basis for the subtle worlds and their forms. And its grossest, densest operation is this dense Akasha, Jada Akasha, which is the basis through its 5 modifications of this physical, objective, phenomenal world. So I'm just giving the background against which you will appreciate much more the text that follows. So Sri Aurobindo continues in the Life Divine. Matter is the presentation of force which is most easily intelligible to our intelligence, molded as it is by contacts in matter to which a mind involved in material brain gives the response. So that force going through this process gives the appearance presentation as matter. Our intelligence, having emerged through this, obviously looks at matter and says, this is it, this is only it. The elementary state of material force is, in the view of the old Indian physicists, a condition of pure material extension in space, of which the peculiar property is vibration, typified to us by the phenomenon of sound. So we are not speaking of sound as vibration in air, but an underlying extension with this property of vibration, which is at that level, a condition of pure material extension in space. But vibration in this state of ether is not sufficient to create forms. There must be some obstruction. There must first be some obstruction in the flow of the force ocean, some contraction and expansion, some interplay of vibrations, some impinging of force upon force, so as to create a beginning of fixed relations and mutual effects. I recall the distinction we had, the discussion we had about the flow of water and so on. Unless there is something, some contraction, expansion, interplay of vibration, impinging of force upon force, you don't have relationships, fixed or modified. So that's the first level. Material force modifying its first ethereal status assumes a second, called in the old language the aerial, of which the special property is contact between force and force. Contact that is the basis of all material relations. So when we take two objects and there is contact, well, it's really that principle now in its most gross, most obvious form. Still, we have not as yet real forms, but only varying forces. A sustaining principle is needed. This is provided by a third self-modification of the primitive force, of which the principle of light, electricity, fire and heat is for us the characteristic manifestation. Remember our discussion last time of the triple Agni? So he's describing these three characteristics. And this is the part where there is the aggregation of forces creating the appearance of a sustaining form. Remember in this case, earlier we had the rotational movement taking place. Even then, we can have forms of force preserving their own character and peculiar action, but not stable forms of matter. So the force is sustaining, but where is the material character? And material character, remember, is from resistance. Unless it resists, it is not yet material. So a fourth state characterized by diffusion and a first medium of permanent attractions and repulsions, termed picturesquely water or the liquid state. So let's say we have now two rotating whirlpools. If the two whirlpools are rotating in the same direction, both are clockwise, in the part where they meet, the movement of the flow will be opposite to each other. So when you have two rotating things opposite, what happens? They will push each other apart. Opposite to each other. One will flow into the other, and they will tend to suck into each other. And as they meet and join, they will neutralize each other. But if there are two movements opposite, one clockwise, one anti-clockwise, in the place in between, the water is flowing in, filling, and therefore pushing, the two will drift apart. So he says this, first medium of permanent attractions and repulsions. So we had attractions and repulsions also in the aerial level. But here it is attraction and repulsion not between force, between form. There it was attraction and repulsion between forces. Here, third level, forms have appeared, and fourth level is attraction and repulsion between forms. Two rotating objects, attracting or repelling. first medium of permanent attractions and repulsions. And diffusion is what creates this effect. Two objects, because of the force from one and the other, diffuse each other. The object itself in its periphery, being pure force, meeting another object which is pure force, creates this diffusive effect, attraction and repulsion. This is what in physics will be called the field, force field of a particle. And a fifth of cohesion, termed earth or the solid state, complete the necessary elements. He does not describe here this fifth too much, but we can look at how in these movements, if we have certain patterns of arrangements, they become sustaining, self-sustaining, each feeding the other, and the whole thing as an aggregate being then held together. This takes the form in the way physics describes the hydrogen atom. In the center is a positive charge, outside is a negative charge in rotation. The two neutralize each other's charges and so create a stable appearance. The whirling creates a stable form around, and so on. But you can see internally everything is unstable, everything is changing, but somehow they neutralize, not in a negative way, they neutralize each other's limitations to create a sustaining form which resists breakage. In the atom inherently is this form which opposes being broken. And so it takes an enormous amount of energy to break an atom. And when the atom is broken, it releases a much bigger amount of energy, which was the energy with which it had held itself together. And this is the cohesive principle. Sri Aurobindo continues, all forms of matter of which we are aware, all physical things, even to the most subtle, are built up by the combination of these five elements, even the subtlest of physical things. Upon them also depends all our sensible experience. For by reception of vibration comes the sense of sound. By contact of things in a world of vibration of force, the sense of touch. By action of light in the forms hatched, outlined, sustained by the force of light and fire and heat, the sense of light. This wording is so precise. Hatched, outlined, sustained by the forces of light, fire and heat. The triple fire operation, remember? So the outermost part of it, the most subtlest part, is only a hatching, as if cutting out, shaping out of something which is otherwise one continuity. And it is on that surface that we have the experience of light bouncing from the surface. Light doesn't penetrate, it bounces from the surface. It is an operation where it has not even penetrated the material, it has only entered interaction with the most surface part and bounced. That is the hatching. And then as a result of various hatchings, there is the continuity of the outline. And the outline itself internally has the sustaining character. By the force of light and fire and heat, and the sense of sight is characteristic of this. By the fourth element, the sense of taste. By the fifth, the sense of smell. He doesn't elaborate too much here. All is essentially response to vibratory contacts between force and force. In this way, the ancient thinkers bridged the gulf between pure force and its final modifications, that is the appearance of matter and form, and satisfied the difficulty which prevents the ordinary human mind from understanding how all these forms, which are to its senses so real, solid and durable, can be in truth only temporary phenomena, and a thing like pure energy, to the senses non-existent, intangible and almost incredible, can be the one permanent cosmic reality. How can we understand that there is only pure energy which is the permanent reality? Energy to our senses is non-existent, intangible and almost incredible. So non-existent, where is the energy? I don't see it. Intangible, I pass my hand through it. If there was, as you say, this enormous energy, I would feel something. I feel nothing. I can touch nothing. And therefore, unbelievable to the sense mind. Incredible. But in the operations of the things we can sense, we can experience energy. Where do we experience energy? When we feel heat. When we feel something pushing or vibrating hard, we say, this is energetic. And we describe 5 kinds of energetic experience. A vibrating object, when I touch it, oh yes, I can feel its energy. I touch something which is warm, yes, I can feel a sensation. It's there. There's a bright, intense heat radiating or light radiating, oh yes, I can see the energy. Or a gust of wind hits me. Yes, that is energy. Something crashes on my head. Yes, I can feel its energy. So these are the 5 real modifications in the material processes that we see. We can tangibly say, this is energy. And they all correspond to the 5 modifications of pure force and correspond to the 5 senses. But in this way, through this description, our mind, our sensory mind can say, yes, now I understand how pure energy is the ultimate reality and everything else is appearance only, temporary phenomena. But Sri Aurobindo continues, the problem of consciousness is not solved by this theory, for it does not explain how the contact of vibrations of force should give rise to conscious sensation. Why is it that when I experience these things, I am aware of these things? Where did this awareness come? The Sankhyas, or analytic thinkers, posited therefore behind these 5 elements 2 principles, which they called Mahat and Ahankara. Principles which are really non-material. For the first is nothing but the vast cosmic principle of force, and the other, the divisional principle of ego formation. That is the first is the principle of pure force as an underlying oceanic reality, but behind that is this principle that chooses to accept division and relationship within force itself, division separating the possibilities of multiple forces. Nevertheless, these 2 principles, as also the principle of intelligence, become active in consciousness not by virtue of force itself, but by virtue of an inactive conscious soul or souls, in which its activities are reflected, and by that reflection assume the hue of consciousness. Such is the explanation of things offered by the school of Indian philosophy, which comes nearest to the modern materialistic ideas, and which carried the idea of a mechanical or unconscious force in nature as far as possible to a seriously reflective Indian mind. And so he says how physical analysis of matter by modern science has come to the same general conclusion of this, etc. We skip that now. For those who are interested, the chapter is called Conscious Force, chapter 10, in the Life Divine. Now with this, there is one more chapter, one more place. In fact, there are many places Sri Aurobindo refers to this 5 elements. In the Essays on the Gita, similarly, where he discusses the Sankhya philosophy, there's a description there. In Savitri, you will find similarly a description as Narad descends from the subtle worlds into the gross world, as if his consciousness is materializing itself, the 5 gradations from the etheric to the aerial to the fire, and how all the 5 senses kick in at each step that is described. It's fascinating. But I'm now looking at another chapter in the Life Divine where this is also described, where we will get certain further insights. The chapter is called The Ascending Series of Substance. And it begins like this. If we consider what it is that most represents to us the materiality of matter, we shall see that it is its aspects of solidity, tangibility, increasing resistance, firm response to the sense of touch. What do you call material? Air is not material. Light is not material. Thought, not material. Emotion, not material. This, I know, this is matter. You hit a brick, it's much more material than even your body. So what is the character there? Solid, tangible, you can grasp, touch. Increasing resistance. The more it resists change, the more we say, this is solid, this is material. Look at the food you eat. I had some juices, it digested quickly. I'm hungry. The food was not material enough. I ate some fruit. Oh yes, it was solid, but it digests quickly. But when I've eaten some really heavy stuff, which stays stuck in my stomach, resisting being digested, then I say, I had a heavy meal. That was really solid food. The sensation of resistance, in whatever form it may be, is the character here. Substance seems more truly material and real in proportion as it presents to us a solid resistance, and by virtue of that resistance, a durability of sensible form on which our consciousness can dwell. Granite, carved 10,000 years ago, still looks the same. Wood, 500 years later, is already weathered out. So granite to us has this durability, and we can continue to appreciate it for a long time. Sand, you could write your name on it. With the next flow of the water, it gets washed out. Water, you could write your name on it all you want, 1,000,000 times. It will not last more than a few milliseconds. So where is it that the person who wants to immortalize his name and form, where does he put his name? Not on water, not on sand, not on wood, but on granite. Carve your name, carve your statue. It will last. And that durability is the real material world for us. In proportion as it is more subtle, less densely resistant, and enduringly seizable by the sense, it appears to us less material. So water is less material, fire is less material, air is less material, empty space is the least material. This attitude of our ordinary consciousness towards matter is a symbol of the essential object for which matter has been created. Now recall in the earlier text we read, he says, for our mind which is formed out of the material evolution, this reality of the material is the most attractive to the senses. But also now this is a deeper truth even. This attitude of our consciousness towards matter points out to us why matter was created in the whole series of gradations of reality. This has persistence, resistance, enduring character, enduring form. And you notice in the form itself there is opposition to being changed. Substance passes into the material status in order that it may present to the consciousness which has to deal with it durability, firmly seizable images on which the mind can rest and base its operations. You see, in the emotional world, in the domain of pure energy moving in vibrations of emotions, right now I feel sad, next moment I feel happy, third moment I am excited about something. What can we place our mind on which will last, which will be tangible? If my sadness is represented in a picture in matter, If my happiness is represented in another picture in matter, and so on, my mind can rest on it and say, this is sadness, this is happiness, this represents for me this emotion, this reality. So there is a base on which mind can settle and hold, and in which many minds can objectively share their experience. Otherwise, my happiness or sadness, you cannot feel. How do we share with each other? The moment you have objectivized in permanent, durable form, we can share. So, durable, firmly seizable images on which the mind can rest and base its operations, and which the life can handle with at least a relative surety of permanence in the form upon which it works. If I release from my heart a form of energy of emotions, it will dissipate eventually. But if I create a form in matter and infuse in it life energy, that I know will last relatively long at least. Permanence in the form, relatively. Therefore, in the ancient Vedic formula, earth, type of the more solid states of substance, was accepted as the symbolic name of the material principle. So among all the principles, we turn to earth. And in the earth domain, among all the gradations of matter, this earth, which is solid rock, is the symbolic name of the material principle. Therefore, too, touch or contact is for us the essential basis of sense. All other physical senses, taste, smell, hearing, sight, are based upon a series of more and more subtle and indirect contacts between the recipient and between the percipient and the perceived. So you will see, remember last time we read in Sri Aurobindo's description, only in the material plane we can never find the 5 elements entirely in purity. On other levels you can. In the material plane they are always mixed. And the dominant theme of their mixture is the matter principle. When the earth principle is strong, all the other things represented here have physical solidity. The air itself, if I move my hand, I can feel it flow against my hand. It has a materiality, although very subtle. But everything in the material domain has this earth principle or matter principle as its dominant character. And so you have sustained experience of forms, and that's what makes the material world. If there was some object in which this earth principle, the 5th of the 5 elements, was not strong and other things were stronger, what would happen? I would not experience it in physical world as physical object or as physical form. For example, my emotions, which have this welling up of the 4th element and everything else associated with it. My heart, when it is happy, it's full of light, it's full of clarity, it vibrates in a subtle vibration. I hear my heart singing, the sound of it. All that is wonderful, but I cannot show it to you. I cannot make you touch my emotions. It doesn't belong to the physical world. At best, it rests on the physical base of my body in order to be able to express itself in the physical world. But the experience itself is primarily in my subtle body and not in my gross body. And when I'm interiorized, disconnected from the gross physical body, all my emotions acquire an intensity of character which is overwhelming, as we often have in our dream state when we are in the subtle body. And all of us would have had experiences like this. I'm so happy that I'm bursting with that happiness, and the intensity of it wakes me up. Or somebody has a dream where somebody close to go, and suddenly the dream happens, we don't know why. And you're weeping and weeping with such intensity that you have become sadness, so intense that you wake up from that intensity. And if you're a little conscious, you will notice in the transition to waking up, that is in the transition when your consciousness shifts to the gross body, the intensity rapidly diminishes, diffuses, fades out. And at best now you have a sensation in the chest region. But in the subtle body, in the dream state, the whole of me was that intense sadness or that intense happiness or that intense excitement. I was not feeling excitement, I was excitement. I was not feeling happiness, I was happiness. When returning to the gross body, I have become gross body and I feel happiness, sadness, excitement, which is happening in the subtle body. Now, if you look at it this way, all substance universally in the cosmos of all gradations, formed of all combinations of 5 elements, all being present here simultaneously. When we look through our body's senses, when our mind looks through the body's senses, it can only enter in relation with things where the earth principle is stronger. In other words, all the subtle worlds being present here right now, we cannot enter in relation with them because we are entering in relation through material substance, material phenomenon, and can therefore contact only things where the earth principle is strongest. Therefore, I do not feel, see, touch, smell the subtle worlds, except through my subtle senses, but not through my gross senses, which are embedded in the material formal element, earth principle first. So you see what he's saying here makes so much sense. All of these being simultaneously present, you need the earth principle, earth substance to provide stable form on which life could experience a sustaining expression and mind could rest itself with some base of operation where we can have this objectivity of shared experience. Therefore, to touch, contact is for us the essential base of sense. All other physical senses are based on a series of more and more subtle and indirect contacts. So in the earth world, you will find we are always in some relationship of contact, of touch. Even when I hear, I am hearing sound which touches my eardrum and shakes it. I am seeing light which touches my retina and in the touch provokes some response. And the smell is from the air which enters my nostrils, touches a membrane, penetrates the membrane, enters in a chemical reaction, and then only I smell. Or the same with touch, with taste. It has to touch the tongue and penetrate before I can have something. When they take homeopathic medicine, they tell you not to swallow it, but hold it under your tongue. You could hold it on your tongue, doesn't matter. But under your tongue is the softer part, more sensitive, not to taste, but softer, more sensitive to this diffusion. All taste involves diffusion of some substance entering the tongue. Under the tongue being the softest, it can take in and directly into the bloodstream whatever is held in the mouth. And so as this sugar part dissolves, the subtler part of the medicine, which is the main component of homeopathic medicine, goes straight into the bloodstream and immediately affects, at a subtle level, its action. Even before it could go to the stomach, get digested and absorbed through the intestines, none of that is involved. Whereas the allopathic medicines, mostly, not all, most of them are on a grosser level where it has to be swallowed, gets into the stomach, goes through a digestive process, and generally after half an hour they begin to kick in. So you've taken a painkiller, it takes half an hour before the pain begins to numb, etc. But you'll find other things, that's why I said generally. Within allopathic medicine also, which is more gross substance, the sugar component is absorbed at the tongue level. I'm digressing from our discussion, but it will help us understand the gradations of substance and their interaction better. So somebody who is right now in a coma from insufficient sugar, you put the sugar grains on the tongue It's not gone in, he has not swallowed it, it's not got digested, it's not gone to the intestines to be absorbed into bloodstream. While it's on the tongue, gradually the person begins to wake up. And the same with salts. These are things which dissolve instantly. So the things which have strong taste, they have strong taste because they dissolve instantly and they're absorbed directly there. That's why the taste is closest to the fourth principle, where diffusion is involved of the sustained, of a form which is being sustained. I'm sorry, the smell is, taste is the diffusion. So all our five senses in the material domain are based on the earth principle and need tangible contact of form against resistant form. The molecules which are absorbed through breathing or through taste are entering in chemical reaction. They are not dissolved in the process. The atoms continue as they were. The sound hitting our eardrum is vibration in the physical air. The air does not change. The form of the thing we meet is pushing against form that we are through the five senses. But nothing is dissolved, nothing is modified. And this is the reality of the physical world, biological organs and physical senses. If you enter the subtle world, in the subtle body, in a gradation no more physical, because we have also subtle physical levels, but in a gradation no more physical, there the senses work very differently. There things can interpenetrate. Remember, in the vital world, you can have energy interpenetrating and passing through each other, entering in contact or not, depending on their grossness, depending on their quality or grossness. So we can have two people sitting next to each other, our auras, so to say, cross each other, but need not necessarily touch, although the physical body will touch. At that point, the thought of one person need not touch my thought unless I turn my attention to connect. Now, in the subtle world, therefore, many energies can pass through at the same time. Many forms can pass through each other at the same time without necessarily meeting. But if they choose to be of the same vibrational quality or having a same interest in consciousness, then they can experience contact, touch. But even there, unlike a physical contact where I need to touch you to know you are there, if I'm not looking, in the subtle, you feel the presence. You feel the presence of the other even at a distance, because distance is irrelevant for the contact of energy. So when you're having a conversation on the phone, on a mobile phone with somebody, it doesn't matter whether the person is sitting next to you or is halfway around the earth. You begin to feel very quickly the energetic contact, the emotional connection. And if you make an effort to tune in, you can even feel the thoughts. But the contact of the emotion is almost as vivid as if the person is in front of you. Especially if you continue the conversation long enough. Often you will see when people are in such contact, they will close their eyes to remove the illusion of distance, because distance is an illusion to the emotions. You close the eyes and you hear and your heart leans and then you make connection and the contact is made. So in the subtle world, where earth principle, the fifth element, is not so strong, the water principle, permeability, is stronger. There, the whole operation of the five senses is also different. As I said, distance becomes irrelevant. It is the contact of consciousness, interest of consciousness, permeability that takes place through the interest of consciousness, which is the dominant character. And as you go higher up, it changes, it becomes more and more subtle, and the other gradations of the five elements, they become more and more important. In the highest, in the level, let's say, to us of soul consciousness, form is no more there. It is pure affinity of vibration of what? Of the soul's aspiration. Where we share a common aspiration, we feel close. Where our interests are turned differently, we feel far. Even though we are related by blood, we are related by work, we are related by all kinds of material bonds of dependence, of financial interactions, or whatever you may say. At the soul level, we may be completely apart if our aspirations are in different directions. But where the aspirations align, one feels close there, in that part of the vibration of the soul consciousness. So there, all the other four elements seem as if to fade. Only the pure vibrational consciousness of quality of the consciousness is what remains as our base of relationship. There is no compulsion of force upon force there. There is no compulsion of form. But there can be experience of force, experience of form, secondarily to the first element, to that pure alignment of vibrational quality. When the soul looks at soul, there is a perception of form. But the form itself is as if soul substance expressing itself incidentally, secondarily, in form, as form. The form itself is fluid, expressive of the quality of its vibration, of the maturity of its consciousness, and so on. I don't remember if we had the discussion on the Sunday or Friday about this mother describing how in the supramental world, depending on the maturity of your consciousness, you are either seen in the form of a child or an adult. And depending on the richness of the capacities and skills developed, you are either seen as without clothes or with clothes. The clothes are a spontaneous expression of the skills, capacities of the consciousness developed to wield in the world. The shape, being child or adult, is an expression spontaneously of the maturity of the consciousness as it feels itself to be, and so on. The form exists incidental to that first vibration. Now, if you see, from the densest, grossest matter to the highest level of spirit, and think of it in terms of the five elements, or the five modifications of force as it moves to form, at the highest level it will be first element. At the lowest level it will be fifth element, which predominate. But on all levels in between, all five elements will be operating, modifying, creating degrees, gradations of experience. So we continue with the text. Equally, in the Sankhya classification of the five elemental states of substance, from ether to earth, we see that their characteristic is a constant progression from the more subtle to the less subtle. So that at the summit we have the subtle vibrations of the ethereal, and at the base the grossest density of earthly or solid elemental condition. Matter, therefore, is the last stage known to us in the progress of pure substance towards a base of cosmic relation in which the first word shall be not spirit but form. And form in its utmost possible development of concentration, resistance, durably gross image, mutual impenetrability. The culminating point of distinction, separation and division. So now if you see the whole thing as one energy, one consciousness, the culmination of the five elemental process is here in the form. In its most extreme, it has all this. Concentration, all the energy is densely brought in together. All the vibrations are gathered and concentrated and held. Resistance, force, experiences opposition to force, resistance. Durably gross image, you can hit at it all you want, you can turn it around, you can close your eyes and open, you can look at it from far and from near, you can change the intensity of the light, it's still the durably gross image. Mutual impenetrability, it will not cross into each other. And the culminating point of the distinction, separation, division. Now you notice he's describing five characteristics of the material world, and the five correspond to the five operations of consciousness from the ether to matter. In the material world, the etheric principle is this concentration of vibrations represented here. The airy principle is the resistance to force. Now, force meeting force, but resisted. And the third principle, which creates the form, the fiery igneous principle, creating image, but durably gross image. And the fourth principle was the interpenetration in the fourth element. Here it becomes impenetrability. And the fifth principle, remember, creating sustaining form, here becomes separation, division. Now this is, when you look at it deeply, this whole picture is so profound. You are seeing in one single gaze all the worlds, from the highest pure spirit formless to the lowest gross material separated, divided substance. And even where there's no substance in the material world through the physical senses, you can visualize points distinct from each other and measure them out in empty space. Take a ruler and measure distance in empty space as if it is full of divided, separate points. You can't do that in the vital world or the mental world. In the mental world, you take two ideas. You can't measure a fixed separation between them. In the vital world, you feel two emotions. I am happy, you are sad. Can you measure the distance between the two? The distance itself is elastic. I switch from happiness to sadness or sadness to happiness as quickly or with a long distance gap according to my state of emotion. Distance is not rigid. Physical space is rigid even though it contains nothing. These are all characteristics of the material world. Shift level of consciousness up and up and up, and all these things break down. Interpenetration becomes normal, and so on. Space breaks down. At some point, time breaks down. And you move all the way to the pure consciousness, where form is irrelevant, there is only unity. Oneness which is indivisible. From there to here, these 5 elemental principles describe to you how consciousness becomes this extreme, and at the same time captures all the gradations of worlds in between and their predominant characters. And you see a complete continuity across. Not only the worlds are like that because of the gradations being more and more subtle, so we visualize them in a vertical hierarchy, they all interpenetrate, they're all here, but the essential purer gradations of subtle worlds you cannot see, hear, feel, touch, smell, because you're looking through these senses. Shift your level to the subtle and you can see them. And you can tune into higher or lower gradations of those worlds by shifting levels, by shifting the attention in your subtler substance, but also in the tuning that you do of the 5 elemental modifications of force. Matter, therefore, is the last stage known to us in the progress of pure substance towards a basis of cosmic relation, in which the first world shall be not spirit but form, and form in its utmost possible development of concentration, resistance, durably gross image, mutual impenetrability. The culminating point of distinction, separation and division. This is the intention and character of the material universe. It is the formula of accomplished divisibility. Everything is divided, but with a rigidity even in its division, so that even empty space has a rigidity to distance. And if there is, as there must be in the nature of things, an ascending series in the scale of substance from matter to spirit, it must be marked by a progressive diminution of these capacities most characteristic of the physical principle, and a progressive increase of the opposite characteristics, which will lead us to the formula of pure spiritual self-extension. That is to say, that they must be marked by less and less bondage to the form, more and more subtlety and flexibility of substance and force, more and more interfusion, interpenetration, power of assimilation, power of interchange, power of variation, transmutation, unification. If you observe these words he is describing, they describe gradations by which consciousness becomes more and more subtle. I'd love to dwell on them, but we have run out of time. So we'll complete this idea with a little more. Drawing away from durability of form, we draw towards eternity of essence. Drawing away from our poise in the persistent separation and resistance of material, of physical matter, we draw near to the highest divine poise in the infinity, unity, and indivisibility of spirit. Between gross substance and pure spirit substance, this must be the fundamental antinomy. In matter, chit or consciousness force masses itself more and more to resist and stand out against other masses of the same conscious force. In substance of spirit, pure consciousness images itself freely in its sense of itself with an essential indivisibility and a constant unifying interchange as the basic formula even of the most diversifying play of its own force. Even in the spirit consciousness, pure spirit consciousness, we can be a million forms of being, but we all know our underlying unity. We can never ever experience complete separation, complete loss, complete division. Images are there, but all images are spontaneous expressions of our underlying unity, and so on. Between these two poles, there is the possibility of an infinite gradation. Suddenly the whole universe, the whole cosmos, and the whole range from pure spirit to divided matter, it's all there in a single vision, all built up by these 5 elemental self-modifications of pure force, of pure consciousness, which is pure energy. And with this, why is he discussing all this? From here, the whole idea of the possibility of divine life, divine mind, perfected human soul, and the very gross and seemingly undivine body or formula of physical being, all of this acquires a new possibility, new potential. Even in matter, therefore, the divine consciousness can manifest because it is one continuity of gradations, but of one force taking on these different forms. It is only a question of bringing forward its possibilities and recasting, reshaping in the manifestation higher possibilities. So we leave this text with this. Those who are interested, you can look at this more deeply. He gives example of how in the higher worlds, let's just finish with this. That formula is the result of a certain fixed relation between sense and substance from which the material universe has started. I'm skipping lines, but you see this idea. And then life and mind may manifest themselves in other relations to substance and work out different physical laws, other and larger habits, even a different substance of body with a freer action of the sense, a freer action of the life, a freer action of the mind. Death, division, mutual resistance and exclusion between embodied masses of the same conscious force are the formula of our physical existence. In the physical world, you have to knock against another object, so death, division, etc. is the formula. But on the higher worlds, it need not be so. But these things are not the sole possible rhythm of cosmic nature. There are superior states, there are higher worlds, and if the law of these can by any progress of man and by any liberation of our substance from its present imperfections be imposed on this sensible form and instrument of our being, then there may be even here a physical working of divine mind and sense, a physical working of divine life in the human frame, and even the evolution upon earth of something that we may call a divinely human body. The body of man also may someday come by this transfiguration. The Earth Mother too may reveal in us her Godhead. So, then he speaks also in the physical universe, there is an ascending series of substance which belongs to the physical domain, subtle physical, remember the term. And there are in the tradition described 7 gradations of matter in the physical world. And we live in the grossest of the 7 subplanes of the material world. If you shift to the 6th or 5th or 4th, already there you have physical density form and sustaining form with the sense of division, but where elasticity is more common and perfection of form and beauty is possible. Even matter becomes iridescent, translucent, giving off its own light, and yet it is material. And after that you would move to the vital plane, where the intermiscence, the mixing between is the dominant character. Rigidity of form is not so much there. After that into the, and there again 7 gradations. After that into the mental plane, and again 7 gradations, and so on. What a richly complex universe, but all of it captured in this single vision. 5 elemental principles of self-modification, of pure force, which is always that in its origin. And so this matter, this object, this body, essentially is that, is pure spirit. Having gone through those self-modifications, we have the appearance of something completely opposite, different, divided, formed of compulsion of death. But if we can activate those higher possibilities, not only the substance, but their laws, which are natural to those higher levels, we can impose those forces, those laws, those principles on the body, recast even the body's substance. And you could express the character of spirit in substance, which is matter, which operates in the domain where material division is still the nature of this domain, but the substance itself knows that it is not divided, is able to modify itself and express qualities natural to the higher grades of consciousness, and so on. To close the discussion on the 5 elements, we have seen the 2 other things behind. Remember Sri Aurobindo referring to 7 being what the ancients thought of always. So 7 elements we have also read about from Sri Aurobindo. We understand now how subtle worlds relate to the gross worlds. What is it that separates them or brings them together? How the subtle body can therefore see things of the subtle world but cannot see as easily of the gross world, and so on. All of this now becomes very clear. And the reality in its totality is much simpler than when we look at it in pieces and then try to understand pieces without understanding their underlying common base and principle. So it's a beautiful vision, and it is something worth meditating upon. Just this idea that this is one gigantic expression of the divine pure spirit consciousness force, in which all these are like foam, layers and layers modifying, forming through 5 elemental transitions. And all those examples we took of the ocean and the whirlpool and the forms, all that at the back of the mind, you can see this is how this world is made. So beautiful, so extraordinary. Filled with, remember, existence, consciousness, force, delight. The whole forming is an outburst of delight. The whole movement of play of force is an outburst of its delight. Now secret in its most essential level, concealed through these layers of self-modification. We can meditate on this briefly.